Welcome back, Social 10. Today I want you to leave here knowing more about ideologies. So when you leave here today, I hope you know the definition of what is an ideology. So we're going to cover that. I want you to understand that ideologies can come into two groupings. I might sometimes refer to them as ideological families or themes of ideologies, and they have distinctive values. One side is individualism and one side is collectivism. So I want you to leave here today knowing some of the values associated with those two groupings of ideologies. We're also going to talk about themes and other values and assumptions that ideologies often contain. Ideologies are often inspired by some kind of commentary about common themes. So when you leave here today, I want you to be somewhat familiar with some of the themes that have inspired ideologies. We're also going to be looking at some specific ideologies, including capitalism, social Darwinism, and realism. And I want you to connect them to ideas that we've studied this year, like exploitation. And ultimately, because the course is about globalization, I want you to be able to connect the ideologies we study with globalization. Chances are we might not get through that entire list today. We might come back to this lesson tomorrow as we finish up this unit on historical globalization. Next year, in Social 20, when you study the French Revolution, you're going to hear more about ideologies again. We're going to talk about the political spectrum. We're going to talk about liberals and conservatives, radicals and reactionaries. And when we get to Social 30, much of the course is built on ideologies to the extent that the textbook is, in fact, titled Perspectives on Ideology. So the message that I'm sending you here today is a message I send you most days. Don't throw away your notes today. That what we're doing is preloading some concepts that are going to be building blocks for Social 30. This is an important lesson today and tomorrow, and therefore I don't want you to just purge your notes at the end of the day or at the end of the year. Something I'd like to remind you about is that if you're having difficulty with the big picture of the year, that day to day you seem okay, but then a week later you seem to be forgetting things, something that you need to look into more is the rehearsal part. To transfer your short into long-term memories, you need to rehearse what you've learned. So it might not be on the board every day for you to review your notes that we're taking, but if you're struggling with all the knowledge, the concepts that we're covering, then you might need to go back and review your notes each night, and that'll be helpful for you. So first concept, and keep in mind these notes are in the Google Classroom for you. It's all on lesson 14, but it's probably to your benefit to paraphrase and to reduce it down into your own physical notes, because that's how you're going to transfer it into more long-term memory and actually understand what we're talking about. So the first concept is, what is an ideology? Simple definition, it's a set of beliefs and values. It's the way you see the world. So that's the simple definition, right? It's the way you see the world. It's the way you want to see the world. It's the world you'd like to see created. That's your ideology. So that's a simple definition. That's a working definition. So what is an ideology? It's your beliefs and values. It's the way you see the world. It's the world you want to see created. And because it is a set of all your beliefs and values, no two people in this room will have the identical ideology. Even people that are ideologically similar, they typically diverge at some point. When you have a conversation with somebody and you agree with them about a lot of things, if you talk with them long enough, there might be something you disagree about. And the message isn't that one person is correct and one person is incorrect. We just have different ideologies. So a longer definition of ideology is each ideology attempts to shape society to fit its particular worldview. So you have a worldview, this is the way it should be, and your ideology is you trying to shape society to become what you think the world should be. So we're going to study individuals like Karl Marx, and he believed that the world should be based on equality. And collective good and common interest, and this collective responsibility to help each other. So he attempted to shape a society that would end up creating that ends that he wanted. How can he encourage people to be their brother's keeper, to look after each other? How do we accomplish that? Each society, or each ideology, has a moral dimension. So morals, ethics, these are things that we'll study in much more detail if you take Social Sciences 30. But morals and ethics, what is the purpose of life? How do you live a good life? How do you be a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good parent, a good friend? What kind of actions are justified and what kind of actions are not justified? These are ideas that people have. And as a package, these begin to shape their moral identity. Ideology is normative. It attempts to present its ideas and experiences as inherent in human nature. So ideologies will have some kind of message about human nature. So at the beginning of this year, I mentioned that all essays that you will write, all A2s that you write, it has some kind of philosophical, psychological dimension. If this, then what? So if mankind is by nature rational, then what kind of economic system can we have? If mankind by nature is exploitive, then what kind of economic system should we have? If mankind by nature is selfish, then what kind of economic system should we have? If mankind by nature is apathetic, then what kind of political system should we have? So each ideology has a message in it about human nature, and because of that, there's some conclusions. If this, then what? It is biased towards a specific group. All ideologies are biased. Bias just means a point of view. We often hear the word bias and we think that means that it's wrong. There's a bias to it. Everything has a bias. And again, the point of living in a pluralistic society where there's multicultures and multiplicity of opinion is we should expect to see bias. We should expect to disagree with others, and that's a sign of a healthy, multicultural, pluralistic society where there's tolerance of different points of view. It universalizes a narrow and limited view and sells them to others with a crusading zeal. So there is a bit of a warning in the last sentence. Depending upon how zealous you get with your crusade and how limited your ideology is, it can become very prescriptive to encouraging more than just living in intolerance of others, but maybe living in intolerance. So we'll see in Social 20 about ultranationalism and how it inspires racist ideologies or how it connects to racist ideologies. And we'll see how that results in things like the Holocaust against the Jewish people. So there is a warning in that final sentence. So very simply, our first task today is what is an ideology? It's a set of beliefs and values. It's the way you see the world. It's the world that you want to create. But combined in that, there's some ideas about, what is the role of citizen? What is the role of government? What is the role of neighbor? What is the role of parent? What is the role of friend? It talks about, what is the purpose of a good life? How do we define a good life? There's all these moral dimensions as well. So that's our first objective today. What is an ideology? And you're never going to be asked to memorize and repeat what's in the box. But you might see that box and have to dissect the language. And in order to dissect it, understanding the simple definition will help. Do we understand the simple definition? Set of beliefs and values, the way you see the world, it's the world you want to see. What is right? What is not right? So the next step, we need to now reduce or we need to organize ideologies into two groupings. Some are individualist, some are collectivist. So we just defined ideologies and said that ideologies typically have values and assumptions, and now we're going to say here's two groupings, and we can look at them to see some of their values and assumptions, some of the what we call bedrock principles. So collectivism and individualism are two concepts you should have seen in grade 9. You may not have referred to them in those terms, but definitely in grade 9 when you're studying economics, you looked at some of these concepts. You do not need to copy down the chart. The chart's already in our notes that you have access to. What you should copy down, though, is you could create a abbreviated version of a T-chart in your notes and put some ideas, general ideas on one side with collectivism and some general ideas on the other side with individualism. So what are some general ideas on the side of collectivism? Well, I think you can see some divergence just on the first point. Under collectivism, the survival of the collective takes precedence over the individual. Under individualism, we have individual self-worth. I think of Star Trek. I think of Star Trek maybe too much. But I think of Star Trek when I think about this concept. In Star Trek, in the original series, in the original movies, not the new timeline, but in the original series, Spock sacrifices himself to save the ship. And when he does that, he says, to sacrifice the one to save the many is justified. That's the concept under collectivism. Survival of the group, more important than survival of any person within it. So we may need to sacrifice one person. We might expect self-sacrifice. We might expect Spock to save the ship at the cost of his own life. On the other side, under individualism, ultimate moral authority lies with us, not the group. So we shouldn't be called upon by the group to sacrifice ourselves. Every person for himself on the individualism side for sure. So the first point, collectivism versus individualism, it shouldn't be surprising that under collectivism, group takes precedence, right? The focus is on the group. The group must survive. Under individualism, it's the person, the individual must survive. So how do we make sure we have a good life? Under collectivism, good life is by cooperating. Good life is by working together. Under individualism, a good life is through competition, and a good life is through self-interest. How do you get to a good life? How do we make sure that we live the best life possible? Under collectivism, we work together. We serve the community. Under individualism, we compete and we serve ourselves. These are two opposite ways of seeing the world. At the end of the day, when you go to bed and you say, "Did I have a good day?" Well, a collectivist would say, "Well, I helped the group, so yes, I did have a good day." An individualist would say, "I helped myself." So most of what we've talked about so far are economic ideas. This next one is fairly social and could be political as well. Collectivists want to see conformity. So in a collectivist society like North Korea, there's only a limited number of haircuts men are allowed to have. In an individualist society, like Canada to some extent, socially, we value social individualism. There's not one prescribed haircut for men, thankfully, because not all of us could pull it off. And in fact, we have a lot of individuality and fluidity in terms of self-expression. So another point of convergence here is, to what extent are you meant to conform to social norms? And under collectivism, conformity is the path to a good life. Under individualism, you're allowed to be unique. Be you, whatever that is. So that's a general introduction to individualism versus collectivism. We'll come back and we'll be mentioning those words, but under collectivism we have words like cooperation, we have common good, conformity, and under individualism we have self-interest and uniqueness. Individualism has more liberty, more freedom. Collectivism has more responsibility. Any questions about individualism versus collectivism? Take a peek at your T-chart that you wrote down and see if it makes sense to you. So again, on individualism side, you have self-interest, you have uniqueness, you have freedom, and under collectivism side, you have the idea of cooperation, common good, collective interest, and responsibility and conformity. So next up, we're looking at the idea that ideologies contain themes, and within an ideology, you should be able to see some values and assumptions being communicated. A recurring theme, as shown with the following source, is to what extent should we embrace change? And that's going to be a big theme at the beginning of Social 20. So you're going to have some radicals that say, we are so committed to change, we're willing to kill to achieve it. You have reactionaries that are saying, we're so committed to returning to a past glory, we're willing to kill to achieve it. And then you have liberals and conservatives and moderates wrestling in the middle about how much change is acceptable. So a recurring theme among ideologies is, do we want to see change? Do we like it the way it is, the way it was, or the way it could be? So that's a recurring theme. So put simply, someone that is happy with the status quo, the way it is, someone that says, the status quo is the way to go. Maybe I'll just type this onto the screen to help us out. So if you like the status quo, you think the status quo is the way to go, you like it the way it is, anybody know what ideological family that you'd belong to? Would they be radical? Would they be reactionary? Would they be moderate, liberal, conservative? People that like it the way it is are seen as conservatives. They don't want sudden change. They don't want change that betrays the great chain of being. They dislike sudden changes that might betray our great chain of being, our connections to our ancestors. So conservatives like the status quo, they like it the way it is. They don't like sudden changes. So let's think about a change before we implement it. Because we have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, we have this chain that links us through history. And we're only here because of the sacrifices they made. So if we suddenly betray the values and morals of our ancestors, then we're breaking a promise. We're breaking a chain with them. So conservatives are slow to change. So that's one of the ideological groupings, conservative. But we also have the idea of progress. Changes in a new direction. And people who like that are often referred to as valuing liberalism. They're liberals. Progress, changes in a new direction are liberals. But if you are so committed to progress, if you're violently committed or excited about achieving progress, you might be referred to as a radical. Radicalism. So radicals are people that are seeing a world that they want to create, a world that's never been there, and they can't wait for it. So they're willing to use violence to create that world. Liberals also want to create a new world, but they're not willing to use violence to create it. And conservatives want to hang on to the world that is. They like the status quo. So one of the themes that we have in ideologies is, should we change? In the 20th century, we had Benito Mussolini in Italy in the 1920s, and he looked at Italy and said, we used to be great. We had the Roman Empire. We were masters of the known world. We're going to go back to that. So Benito Mussolini started using some of the symbols of the Roman Empire to unite the Italian people, and started being more aggressive in his foreign policy to try to show the might of Italy. When Mussolini in the 20th century was attempting to return to a glorious previous order, that's reactionaryism. So what kind of change do you want to see? Reactionaries say, we want to go back to the way it was. And we're willing to use violence to achieve that. What kind of change do you want to see? We like it the way it is. Those are conservatives. What kind of change do you want to see? We see progress. We see an exciting new world. Liberals. What kind of change do you want to see? We see progress. We see an exciting new world, and we are so unwilling to wait to see it, we're going to kill to achieve it. Radicals. Those terms will come up again next year in Social 20. I just wanted to introduce them to you this year. Any questions about those terms? So the main message here is that ideologies often contain some kind of message about change. Let's take a look at this quote and see if you can see a message about change. Liberalism is the philosophy of our time because it does not try to conserve every tradition of the past, because it does not apply to new problems, the old doctrine solutions, because it is prepared to experiment and innovate, and because it shows that the past is less important than the future. Do you see how this ideology has a message about change? Yes, we do. Okay. In terms of change, would you say that they are wanting to go back to a previous order or create something new? Something new. Do they mention the use of violence as a means to an end? No. So now we can place them on some kind of spectrum. They're not radical, but they're not conservative. They don't like the status quo. They're definitely not reactionary. They don't want to go back to a previous order. They're forward-looking. They're progressive. They're liberal. The idea of liberalism is even right there in the first sentence.
Liberalism is still kind of centrist because it keeps some traditions still there.
In Social 30, we're going to have difficulty with the word liberal because economically the word liberal is associated with capitalism, which is more of a right-wing idea. In Canada today, the Liberal Party is a party, so the fact that they have the word liberal in the name can muddy the waters a little bit. So we're going to have to spend more time with the term liberalism in grade 12, but this is meant to be an introduction. The next theme that we're going to look at is domination. You know, to what extent is it justified for some to dominate others? That's a theme. That's a theme that we've seen in some ideologies already this year. To what extent is it justified for some to dominate others? We've seen that theme already this year. My question for you is, where have we seen it? Where have we seen the theme that there's a discussion surrounding to what extent is it justified for some to dominate others? Gandhi? Yes, in Gandhi's story, his story is about a resistance to the British Empire. His story is about a reaction to imperialism. Imperialism is the domination of one group by another. So definitely within the concept of imperialism, there's some assumptions about domination. Have we had any other connections to the idea of domination this year? What if I said it's a theme in realism? What's our quote about realism this year? I won't be getting it. What is the quote about realism this year? I think it's somebody running by. Our quote about realism this year is from the Athenians: the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. We need to review. You need to review. You need to review what we do and transfer it from your short to your longer term memory. Otherwise, when you get to multiple choice like this Friday, something that we spent considerable time on, like that realist theme, might not be there for you to recall. So please do be reviewing. So we have realism, we have imperialism, we have case studies that show some groups controlling others, like the transatlantic slave trade. We have another term that people said, you know what, it's okay that we control you because you're childlike, and that's soft paternalism. And we had that come through Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden. In order to do well in this course, you need to group ideas together. We have a whole grouping around this concept of domination. So when we get to an in-class essay that you haven't seen before, one of the key terms in the prompt could be domination. And all of those things I just mentioned would be the things we'd expect you to talk about. So, better news though, what I have here for you is a source, and then I have some practice multiple choice. So, we'll see if you're ready. So, it's always good to look at the multiple choice question first so that you know why you're reading the source. That's a good tip for multiple choice writing. So, the question says, which of the following actions would be most acceptable to a person who values the ideas outlined above? So, before I read the ideas above, I'm going to try to distinguish between these four things in my mind. A, European carving of Africa to spread civilization. Then I picture it. I might pause, make sure I understand what A means. Okay, I think I can read for that. And if I can't balance four things in my mind at once, I just read it and see if it matches with A. B, colonization of areas of the world to increase trade. And then I might contrast and say, how is A different than B? A and B are very similar. A, European carving of Africa to spread civilization. B, colonization of areas of the world to increase trade. The difference here is, why are we doing it? Because European carving of Africa is colonization of Africa. A, the motivation, the justification of it is, we're doing this, soft paternalism, spread civilization. B, the justification for it is economics. We are increasing trade. C, the creation of a network of nations under the influence of America. A network of nations seems like an American way of saying it's not an empire, because we fought against one, but it sure looks like an empire. And D, decolonization of Africa and revitalization of traditional culture. D does sound different than the others. So now I'm going to read it and see if I can come up with the answer. Domination is a natural urge. Huh. So if I just read that, then it does seem like imperialism is okay. But it can be a poisonous desire within humanity. Now it seems like a critique of domination, a critique of imperialism. Domination has also been used as justification for centuries of Eurocentrism that imprisoned peoples that had been attempting to live isolated traditional lifestyles. Perhaps the most delusional argument, so words like delusional announce what the ideological perspective here is. You're using the same skills on multiple choice that you use on an A1. Perhaps the most delusional argument is that the unequal relationship benefits the weak. And some may even claim that they are parenting the less civil children of the world. This is extremely biased and disregards the wealth of different perspectives. Now that I've read it, I know the answer. I know the answer because I considered the 4 options. I contrasted the 4 options. I visualized the 4 options. I read and I looked for those key terms like delusional and poisonous. And because of words like that, the answer is A, B, C, or D. Maybe just write it on your piece of paper. Yep. I can see your hand up. You just want to shout out the answer. You know what? Let's make everybody wait on it, right? Don't give us the answer. So once again, I would say that the inclusion of words like delusional, attached to the argument that the strong should parent the weak, and the idea of poisonous, attached to the description of imperialism, says that only one of those 4 answers can possibly be the answer. Next up, source 2. Here's the theme, once again, about domination. Based on source 2, is domination an acceptable foundation for an ideology? So that's the first step, and then we'll look at the multiple choice. Is it an acceptable foundation for an ideology? The world has a finite of resources. Imperialism is the justifiable, natural process where the powerful take from the powerless. The process has even been known to benefit both groups. So the question was, well, to begin with, we said same theme, domination, right? So one of the goals today is you're going to identify that ideological perspectives, ideologies have themes. This one has the theme about domination. The first one that we looked at said domination was bad. Does this one say domination is bad or good?
Is like the perspective of resourcing?
Yes. It's good. And what is the key word that says it's good? Justifiable is that key word. And benefit. It benefits both groups. The world has a finite of resources. Imperialism is the justifiable natural process where the powerful take from the powerless. The process has even been known to benefit both groups. So, what would be a foreign policy practice that we can infer? Actually, it's not even infer. What is a foreign policy practice that is explicitly promoted by the source? Yes. Imperialism. So right there it says imperialism is, right? So we don't have to infer it. It's not implicit. It's explicit. It's stated. So this is a pro-domination, pro-intervention, pro-imperialism source. Opposite of the other one. Which of the following arguments offers the best defense for the above perspective? So that's an argument. In an A2, in your essays, you need arguments and you need evidence. And although you could put anything for evidence, some evidence is more insightful because it provides a better defense. So more logical, more sophisticated, more insightful, maybe more precise, more perceptive. So what we're looking for is which of these, A, B, C, or D, would give us the best defense of the above perspective. And there's your 4 answers. My nose is itchy. So let's see if you can come up with the answer and then just write the letter down on your notes. A. The introduction of horses to the indigenous cultures of the Americas. B. The exchange of agricultural crops between the New and Old Worlds. C. The Anglicization of India, transforming that nation into the world's largest democracy. D. The extermination of the violent and deadly Aztec tribe. And I'll get you just consider it, write a letter in your notes, and we'll keep meandering through this lesson. Question? Oh, I don't want you to shout out the answer. So we're going to have 27 multiple choice on Friday that you're going to do on your own. On Thursday, we will have somewhere closer to 60 that we'll do in groups. Some will be done as a big group of a class. Some will be done in smaller clusters. Before Thursday, though, you need to review your notes. Because if you don't understand the answers because you just don't understand the content, then reviewing the process is not really helping you. So next up, we want to consider that some ideologies are used to justify exploitation. So the last concept, the theme was exploitation. So what ideologies have we seen here about exploitation? Well, we've seen survival of the fittest this year. We've seen realism. We've seen social Darwinism. We've looked at the white man's burden and soft paternalism. And we've even talked about capitalism. So these are some ideologies, specific ideologies, that fit in with the theme that was mentioned above. Ideologies are often based on observations about the world around us. So how do you come up with an ideology? You observe things. You observe behavior in your family and your friends. That's how we begin to do or shape ideologies in our youth. These observations are often about recurring themes like, do we want competition or do we want cooperation? Which is better, competition or cooperation? So on Friday, we could embrace cooperation. So on Friday, we could embrace cooperation, and I would say to you that at the end of Friday's multiple choice, we'll have 27 questions, and you're doing them as a group. But you need consensus. So everybody must agree if it's A, B, C, or D for each one, but ultimately you get to work together. Or we might have the other option where it's like, you know what, we're not going to work together as a group, we're going to work by ourselves. There are some people that would love and prefer to work together as a group. They like cooperation. But there's others that would like to see competition because they have a self-interest that is higher than their collective interest. And they don't have faith in the group. They have faith in themselves. So that is an interesting scenario. Would you rather be tested as a group? Our class average right now is 66%. Do you want 66% or do you want your current mark? There's people that are at or below the average that might be okay with the exchange, but those above it would be unhappy. And then there's a different group. My class that comes in after you, their class average is 80. Maybe you're like, hey, can I join that group instead? I'd be okay with an 80 average. But in that class, I have a student that has 100. She doesn't want to go down to an 80. So a recurring theme is competition versus cooperation. How can we ensure the survival of our species? Should corporations be cooperating to get us to Mars? Or will we get to Mars through a competition? Is it a race to Mars that will unlock our next phase of human existence? Or should corporations and government be cooperating so we can pool our resources? What is more likely to fuel innovation? Cooperation or competition? And that's something that you really do need to spend the next 2 years looking for evidence, because you'll be writing essays about that in grade 12. Show me evidence that cooperation's better. Show me evidence that competition's better. We are living at a time of a global pandemic that we've seen, incredible cooperation among nations and incredible cooperation to find vaccines. But there's also a competition among corporations to create those vaccines. And what vaccine do most Canadians either want or have? It's Pfizer. Pfizer is a private corporation competing with others to profit by delivering us the safest and most effective vaccine. So even within our story right now, you can see arguments for competition and arguments for cooperation. So 2 perspectives on the role of competition in history. So we have this long article. I think I'll get you to read it at a later date, right? I'm not going to read through the entire thing. And we have another one here that's a longer perspective as well that talks about competition. So I'll give you some time to go back and read those. Next up, we want to look at ideological responses to globalization. How was socialism and Marxism a response to globalization? Let's introduce this. So what we'd like you to do is begin to assemble a list of different ideologies. This is the most important thing we're doing today. Everything we've done up to this point, we've defined ideologies. We talked about some themes they've had, some groupings, some assumptions. But what we really want you to take away from today and tomorrow's lesson is this is what capitalism is. This is what socialism is. This is what Marxism is. So in order to do that, we had to first teach you what ideologies are and look for some themes or identify some themes to look for. But now we want you to begin to create a list. Now with regards to the course that we're in now, globalization, we should be able to identify things like values, assumptions, and goals. We might be able to see things like role of government, role of citizen. We might be able to link them back to individualism and collectivism and those bedrock principles we looked at the beginning of today. But we also want to look at how is it inspired by globalization? Is your ideology a rejection or challenge of something about globalization? Is it challenging the ideas of imperialism? Or is it celebrating imperialism and therefore celebrating globalization? So all of the following will connect to globalization. So the first ideology is capitalism, one that you studied in grade 9. I want you to splash on the piece of paper some things you remember about capitalism. So if there's some terms that you remember, a person, some values, some assumptions, some roles of government, roles of citizen. Is it individualist? Is it collectivist? Based upon what principles? Splash down some ideas about capitalism. This is where I should see you writing some stuff on a piece of paper. So returning back to, returning back to the bedrock principles of individualism and collectivism, is capitalism about cooperation or competition? Competition. So some of the bedrock principles of capitalism include competition. Is it about collective interest or self-interest? Self-interest. That's another bedrock principle. Sorry? it's based on individualism. So that's the side that it should be on. Competition, self-interest, it's an individualist perspective. It's an individualist ideology. What are some ideal roles of government under capitalism? Under capitalism, the government should
Private market.
yeah, they should support a private market. So how do they do that?
Market economy, right?
They create a market economy, yep. So central to that is, so what's the French term that is associated with capitalism? Do you guys remember it? Yes. Laissez-faire, right? Laissez-faire, leave it alone, hands off. So what should the government do? What is the role of government under capitalism? Keep their hands off the economy. So we don't want the government involved in the distribution, the manufacturing of goods and services. Leave that to the private market. So what is the role of government under capitalism? Keep their hands off the economy. The government can create legislation that protects private property, that protects your right to own property. It can create an atmosphere of economic freedom, the rule of law. These are important things. If there is no, property rights, then that takes away a lot of your reason to work. If you work 80 hours a week, but I just steal from you anything that you make and there's no government to protect your property rights, then you might stop working 80 hours a week. So something government can do under capitalism is protect your property rights, create legislation, have rule of law.
It's centered around the economy.
Yes. So you should think of people like Adam Smith and the idea that we need to find our niche in the economy, right? What is your role? Each one of you are here today and you're on a journey. Some of you already have a niche in the economy. Maybe you have a job. Maybe that's the job that you plan to have for the next 50 years. Maybe it isn't. The global village, right? The world market is very dynamic. It's rapidly evolving. Some of the jobs that you will eventually fulfill are jobs that may not even have been created yet. So a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I should say, 2 years ago, I didn't know what an NFT was. And now NFTs are, a $1 billion industry. They could become a $1 trillion industry. So that's just one example of how rapidly the global economy is changing. So in terms of capitalism, you need to find your niche. What role within the community are you going to play? And are all niches rewarded the same? No. That's key to capitalism, is we'll allow the free market to pay Connor McDavid more than they pay Russ McBride. We value what he does more than we value what I do. He gets paid a lot more. And I get paid a lot more than some other people. And it's all based on the freedom of the market. That's capitalism. So I'm going to stop the video there. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch some videos. And we don't need to watch videos. But we're going to watch some videos on capitalism. We want you to leave here today knowing more about capitalism. We see some of the roots of capitalism even before Adam Smith. So Adam Smith comes up with Wealth of Nations in 1776, but in Jamestown, 1609, during the winter of 1609, when many people were starving, they had this idea: those who do not work shall not eat. That's the essence of capitalism. If you don't put in the work, you will not get rewarded. And even though we have shades of socialism within Canada, it is still a very capitalist country and a very capitalist world.